At my estranged father's will reading, my sister, Rachel, the golden child, was gifted the family mansion, trust fund, and multiple properties. As for me, I received a dilapidated tool shed on a parcel no one ever cared about. What happened next was rather unbelievable. Before we get into the details of the story, we share stories like this every day. If you love them, don't forget to subscribe. Kindly leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. We'd love to stay connected. Now let's get into the details of the story. At the will reading, they handed my sister the keys to the estate. Me? I got a rusted shed and a smile from the lawyer. But they forgot I was the one who used to build the maps. My name's Darren Chase. I'm 41, civil engineer by trade, but my real gift has always been reading land. How it lives, breathes, changes beneath people who think concrete and legacy make things permanent. They don't. Earth shifts, and so do the people you bury in it. I hadn't seen my family in over 15 years. Not since I packed 2 duffels and left the back porch at 19, vowing never to step foot in Fairgrove again. I only came back for the funeral because my therapist told me I needed closure. Closure. What a word. Turns out, closure looks a lot like a leather-bound folder and a lawyer with an expression so neutral it bordered on smug. The room was full of suits and perfume and long-lost blood. Rachel was front and center. Rachel Chase. The golden child, homecoming queen turned regional influencer with a face for pageantry and a mouth built for spin. She cried pretty tears when the lawyer started reading. Our father, Everett Chase, left her the house, the land, the Chase Trust, the vineyard, even the vintage wine collection in the basement. Her husband grinned like he'd just won a game show. People clapped, as if someone had just handed out scholarships. Then came my name. To Darren Chase, I leave the tool shed and surrounding plot on Dry Creek Road. That was it. No explanation. No sentiment. Just a parcel description and a shallow nod from the lawyer. My sister turned to look at me like I was a guest who'd overstayed. I nodded once, slowly, folded my hands, and said nothing. No one else did either. The silence was ripe, tense, and in it, I felt every old wound cracking open like fresh fractures. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that I'd been preparing for this since I was 24. On a road trip back from a failed contract in Nevada, I passed Dry Creek Road and something in me pulled over. I saw the shed. I remembered summers working beside my grandfather there. Saw the slope of the land, the shape of the runoff, the changes in soil density. I pulled out a topo map, sketched quietly, and began a slow game no one else knew I was playing. I used a shell LLC to quietly acquire adjacent parcels over the years. Had surveyors run lines under false renovation projects. Filed a few key zoning exemptions under long-forgotten county loopholes. It was quiet, slow work. Not revenge then, just insurance. But now, it felt like prophecy. Because the mansion Rachel now called her own sat precariously near a shared utility line. One that fed directly through the land they just handed me. At the brunch after the reading, I stood alone at the end of a long mahogany table while Rachel toasted our father. He always knew what was best for his legacy, she beamed. The guests nodded. I sipped from a chipped coffee cup and let the burn of old bitterness settle behind my ribs. When Rachel caught my eye across the room, she raised her glass like we were allies. I raised mine back and toasted quietly, to future earthquakes. I drove to the shed that evening. The road was the same, narrow, pitted, choked with dust and low brush. The shed stood like a forgotten sentinel, corrugated metal eaten at the corners by rust, roof sagging under decades of storms. But the bones were strong, still rooted. I stepped inside and smelled dry cedar, old oil, and memory. My grandfather's hammer hung on the pegboard. I took it down, gripped the handle, and felt something shift in my chest. There was no power, no water, but I wasn't here to live. I was here to measure. I unrolled my maps on the old workbench, lit a lantern, and marked property boundaries. Rachel's estate line dipped too close on the southern corner. A deck extension built illegally over an easement. 2 power boxes outdated and out of code. A well pump rerouted in violation of 2003 groundwater policies. I smiled. They gave her the estate, but I held the strings. That night, I made 3 calls. One to a geotech engineer I'd worked with in Colorado. one to a zoning lawyer in Sacramento who owed me a favor, and one to my old college roommate, now working in municipal planning. No threats, just curiosity. I framed it as research, but the tone of my voice made it clear I wasn't asking for theory. I was laying foundation. I didn't leave the shed that night. I slept on the floor with a tarp under my back and a flashlight balanced on an overturned paint can. The wind pushed against the old tin walls like whispers, and I let them in. Let them talk. Let them remind me of every insult, every forgotten call, every birthday skipped and letter returned. Rachel would never see it coming, because the thing about maps? People think they just show what is. But I've always known they show what could be, and I was about to redraw hers, 1 inch at a time. They thought the tool shed was worthless. What they didn't know was what lay beneath it and under their house. I drove to the county registrar's office just after dawn. The same clerk who'd been there 20 years ago still sat behind the chipped counter, glasses sliding down her nose. She didn't recognize me. Good. I gave her the parcel number, and 10 minutes later, I was holding the original soil surveys and utility blueprints for Dry Creek Road. The land beneath my shed was richer than they ever knew. I'd made a mineral rights claim in 2008 quietly, under a dormant LLC I resurrected for exactly this purpose. Beneath the old lowland rested a rare deposit of bentonite clay, used in construction, filtration, and geotechnical seals. Not worth millions, but enough to legally challenge any structure built within 300 feet of a shared deposit, especially one with unstable terrain. Rachel's mansion? It sat right on the border. I contacted Ron Kovac from Mountain Geotech. We'd worked together on a hillside foundation collapse near Tahoe. I sent him the coordinates and told him what I suspected. "Send me the old gradient maps," he said. "If that slope shifted even 3 degrees since construction, she's got a problem." I faxed him every document I had. 2 hours later, he called back. "She built over a fault line," he said. "Micro but active. Slope instability plus outdated retaining walls. It's a matter of when, not if." That was all I needed. Next came permits. I filed for a non-invasive geological study on my land. Phrased it with enough legal grease to trigger neighbor notifications. 3 days later, white flags appeared along my boundary line. Bright orange spray paint marked elevation read and utilities inside. I made sure the surveyor's truck idled long enough for Rachel's landscaper to take a photo. 2 blocks over, Mrs. Dalloway's gardener asked me what was going on. "Just standard testing," I said. "Might be expanding a shed." He nodded slowly. The gossip spread faster than wildfire in dry brush. By the weekend, 5 neighbors had asked if I was flipping the lot. Rachel, predictably, sent a text, "Hi. Noticed the flags. Everything okay?" I didn't answer. Instead, I drove to the edge of her property and took 6 photos of her back deck. The foundation beams were crumbling cheap redwood instead of pressure-treated support. Her pool sat 20 feet from a drain path rerouted illegally when Dad expanded the estate. 1 hard rain, 1 mud flow, and the whole corner would slip. I cataloged everything. Next, I filed a quiet complaint with the Department of Environmental Quality about improper drainage, citing historical erosion patterns. Another letter went to the zoning office, suspicion of boundary encroachment. Every move was procedural, every complaint legitimate. My signature never appeared. I used a licensed proxy service from Nevada. Rachel couldn't trace it if she tried. Within a week, a city inspector showed up. I wasn't there when he visited, but he left a yellow tag on her front gate, notice of evaluation. Rachel posted a picture of it on social media with a caption about city incompetence. I bookmarked the post. Public denial always made the fall sharper. Ron sent his report in a sealed folder. The slope had shifted 3.7 degrees over 14 years. Retaining walls installed without proper drainage had increased soil moisture. In layman's terms, her home was a slow landslide in waiting. I placed the report in a lockbox under the toolshed floor. Then I filed a temporary use permit for land analysis, a precursor to excavation. It wasn't binding. It didn't even mean I'd break ground. But it meant noise. More flags. More trucks. More whispers. By now, the neighborhood thread online was exploding. Rachel tried to calm it. "It's just Darren playing contractor," she wrote. "He'll get bored." But I wasn't bored. I was focused. Every night, I walked the boundary line with a lantern and clipboard. I made myself visible. Harmless. Curious. Rachel's husband finally confronted me at dusk. "Hey man," he said, trying to sound casual. "This gonna be a problem for the estate?" I smiled. "Not for mine." That week, I sent in my last application, a conditional use variance for mineral exploration. It was dry, full of legal jargon, but one line mattered. The mansion sat within an influence radius. The application triggered another review. Rachel finally called. I let it ring 4 times, then picked up. "Hey Darren," she said, voice too bright. "So, this is a lot. Just exploring my land," I said. "People are talking. They always do." A beat of silence. "You're not planning anything crazy, are you?" I waited, just long enough to let her hear her own fear. "No," I said, and then I hung up. But inside, I was already drawing demolition routes. It doesn't take gasoline to burn down a house, just signatures. A dozen pieces of paper, strategically filed, carry more weight than a wrecking ball. I sat in the tool shed one cold Tuesday morning, coffee going lukewarm on the bench, while I signed the easement termination documents. 2 signatures per page. 17 pages. Each one rolled back permissions my father had signed in the 90s, sloppily, carelessly. Rachel's water main ran through one of them. Her power line ran through another. And all of them expired the moment I revoked access. I submitted the bundle to the county office and left without ceremony. 3 days later, a crew from Cal Power showed up at the estate, clipped the junction box behind the garage, and drove off. By sunset, Rachel's mansion was without electricity. The next morning, I watched from the ridge as a water truck reversed from the property, its contract void. She must have thought it was a billing mistake. She posted about it. Called it a temporary glitch. I smiled. She had tenants in the guest house. 2 young couples renting short-term. When the utilities dropped, so did their patience. Within a week, they packed up and left. I saw the moving vans. One of them knocked on my shed door before leaving, asking if I knew what was going on. I shrugged. "You should ask the owner," I said. "I just own the land next door." Rachel tried calling again. I didn't pick up. Instead, I filed the next piece of paper. A formal request for condemnation under public hazard remediation. I attached Ron's report, photos of the eroding deck, and the slope data. It was airtight. The county had no choice but to send another inspector. I made sure they visited during a storm when the drain runoff flowed visibly through her lower lawn. The photo they took made the front page of the city's real estate blog. Meanwhile, I contacted Danner and Sons, the best demolition outfit in the state. Old friends. No questions. I sent them the slope report and a letter of intent. I told them to stand by. Then I leaked. There was a man named Fisher who ran the Fairgrove Gazette. He'd always hated my father, called him a land thief and political puppet. I sent Fisher a packet with photocopies of old land transfers Dad had made in the 90s, grants and lots he gave to cronies for $1 each, then funneled back through dummy corporations. It wasn't illegal, not fully, but it was ugly. Fisher printed it under the headline, "Chase Estate Built on Corruption." Rachel's silence on the matter said everything. But the fire had already started. More letters arrived at her gate. The yellow warning tag turned into a red citation. She tweeted once about unfair treatment by the city, but that post was deleted within the hour. Probably on her lawyer's advice. I drove past the house twice that week. The curtains were drawn. The once busy driveway now quiet. No visitors. Just one SUV and the hum of a portable generator. That's when I sent the demolition contract. The condemnation was not yet official, but imminent. I preemptively authorized the crew to be on standby for emergency action, citing imminent structural failure. I copied the city's legal office and fire department, per protocol. Then I waited. Rachel emailed me. It was short. "What are you doing?" I didn't reply. Then she tried my work line. Left a voicemail. "Darren, I know things were never good, but you're going too far. We can talk. Please. Just stop this." I listened to it once. Deleted it. That weekend, I sat on the tool shed roof and looked out over the estate. The storm had passed. Sunset laid orange fire across the trees. Her house sat dark, still, already looking like a relic. She had no idea what I'd already filed, what I prepared. What signatures waited in folders inside county offices with no reason to doubt them. Paper burns slower than timber, but when it catches, it's final. I closed my eyes and waited for the spark. She stepped out in a silk robe, screaming about lawyers. The bulldozers didn't stop. They were mine. I stood on the ridge above Dry Creek Road, boots dug into the frost-bitten soil, thermos in hand, as the engine roars echoed against the hillside. The demolition crew had arrived exactly at 6 a.m., as instructed. Yellow steel giants rolled in like executioners. The house had no chance. The notice was final. The permits were posted. The law was satisfied. It was time. Rachel hadn't expected it to actually happen. She must have thought her father's name, her married money, her curated charm could stop consequences. But the estate she flaunted online and used to belittle every relative, every outsider, every non-believer, it wasn't hers anymore. Not legally, not structurally, and now, not physically. A single wave from the site supervisor was all it took. The first blade struck the foundation like a gavel. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I just watched. Rachel arrived 10 minutes later. A black Escalade screeched to a stop beside the security fence. She burst out in slippers, her robe tied tight but slipping at the shoulders. Her voice cut through the diesel grind like a banshee's curse. "Stop." I said stop. "This is private property." The foreman pointed to the laminated packet clipped to the gate. The condemnation order. Signed. Stamped. Legal. She tried to snatch it, but the paper stayed. The law stood. She turned toward the bulldozers, waving her arms, shouting for them to wait for her lawyer. They didn't wait, because they were mine. The excavator took the east wall first. Stucco split like old bread. The roof cracked as weight met gravity. A window burst into glass dust. Rachel screamed something unintelligible and fell to her knees on the wet lawn. Cameras clicked. Reporters from the Fairgrove Gazette and Channel 6 News circled the perimeter. The headline would write itself: "Estate of former Chase family heir demolished amid legal battle." Except there was no battle. The land was mine. Every survey, every signature, every document bore my name. The condemnation was backed by geological reports, utility violations, slope failure data, and non-compliant easement use. The house was not safe. The land was not Rachel's. The trust had expired. And her inheritance, once her fortress, now belonged to the dirt. She threatened to sue me. On live camera, I stood beside the foreman, clipboard in hand, silent. When she spotted me through the dust, she staggered to her feet, running toward the gate. "Darren, you can't do this. You don't understand what you've done." But I did. I turned, walked past the cameras. One reporter asked for comment. I kept walking. Rachel stood behind the gate, screaming my name, then sobbing, then begging. The only thing louder was the collapse of the West Wing. The master bedroom. Her sanctuary. Her throne. Gone. I reached my truck at the top of the ridge and opened the door. Before getting in, I looked back once. The estate was half rubble. The lawn torn into trenches. A lifetime of arrogance reduced to dust and twisted copper. Rachel dropped to the grass again, face buried in her hands. And I drove to City Hall. The receptionist barely looked up. "Name? Darren Chase. Here to finalize a land repurposing." She pointed to a form on a clipboard. I signed. The final act was near. But before that, I watched the footage again that night. It was online within hours. Comments filled with opinions. Some called it justice. Some called it sad. But none knew the truth. None had watched the way Rachel used her inheritance to manipulate, exclude, silence. None saw the years she mocked my career, my absence, my silence. None knew that silence was the sharpest tool I had. I made a call to Danner and Sons. Stage 3. Already cleaning the site, they said. Ready for Phase 2 tomorrow. I hung up, sat on the floor of the tool shed. The lantern burned steady. The maps on the wall were marked and remarked. And in the center of them all, pinned in red, was the spot where the Chase estate had once stood. Now blank. Ready. They gave my sister a mansion and left me a shed. Now she had ashes. And I had the future. The only thing left standing from their empire was my tool shed. And even that was gone by noon. I tore it down myself. Hammer, crowbar, hands wrapped in leather gloves that had known enough dirt to remember me. I didn't save anything inside. No relics, no keepsakes. I threw it all in the dumpster parked along the edge of the lot. I wanted the land clean, flat, ready. By afternoon, the first digger arrived. The same crew who raised the mansion broke ground on Phase 1 of the Chase Community Project. A name with no lineage left, just intention. Blueprints stretched across 3 acres, 12 modular eco-homes, a community greenhouse, and at the heart, a vocational school for trades, electricians, welders, carpenters, masons. Work that mattered. Work that built things. The school bore one name. Grace Hale. My grandmother. The only person who believed in me. When my father called me a dropout, she gave me an old lathe. When Rachel laughed at my blue-collar job, Grandma gave me books on metallurgy and blueprints. When I left home, it was Grace who sent $50 bills folded into recipe cards. She never had more than enough, but she gave like she did. Her name went on every sign, every plaque. And Rachel's? Absent. Construction moved fast. Modular structures, pre-approved permits, streamlined processes I'd set in motion months earlier. By spring, the foundation was laid. By summer, the walls were up. By fall, kids from 2 counties signed up for the first-class cycle. I hired instructors from local unions and paid them double the state rate. My money, clean, private, and earned the hard way, funded it all. Rachel moved out of state. Rumors said she was living with a second cousin somewhere near Phoenix. Disgraced. Divorced. The press stopped calling. The internet moved on. She tried to sue once more, but no court would touch her case. She became a cautionary tale in estate law blogs. Why you don't ignore boundary lines. I didn't gloat. I just worked. On the 1-year anniversary of the demolition, I walked to the ridge. Same place I stood when the bulldozers roared. Only now it was quiet. The grass had returned. The outlines of new roads formed a clean grid below. Kids biked between the houses. A school bell rang from the Grace Hale Trade Center. I stood there alone. No ceremony. No ribbon. I didn't smile. But the ground felt solid beneath my feet. I had laid every inch of this with purpose. Not to punish. Not to bury the past. But to build something better atop it. That's what Grandma would have wanted. Her belief wasn't vengeance. It was renewal. Still, I kept one memory. A brick. Just one. From the estate's east wall. I'd pulled it before the demolition ended. I mounted it to a steel plate, engraved 2 words, never again. It sat inside the school's main office, tucked beside the attendance books. No one asked what it meant, but it reminded me that some inherit money, others inherit silence, and a few rebuild from both. I turned to leave the ridge. The sun was setting behind the pines. Lights scattered across the new roofs. Kids' laughter echoed faintly. The tool shed, the mansion, the bloodlines, gone. All that remained was foundation. And this time, it would hold. And that's how they gave my sister a mansion, left me with a tool shed, and still ended up losing everything. If you stayed with me through this whole story, thank you. Some inherit houses. Others inherit silence. But what you build on that silence, that's up to you. If you want more real stories of betrayal, power, and revenge, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I've got more to tell, and the next one hits even harder. Stick around. The reckoning isn't over yet. See you soon in the next story.